Chapter 3. On the edge of the blistered land, Marra stood and looked around for the source of the voice. It was too bright here. She had gotten used to the dimness of the blistered land. Her eyes ached, as if she was staring at the snowfield instead of a dusty road and a line of fences. "I saw you," said the voice. She squinted against the light and saw the speaker. A man, perfectly ordinary looking in the grey-brown garb that everyone wore. Here on the edge of the desert, there was nothing that stood out about him except that he was shouting at her. "Hello," she croaked. Her voice sounded as harsh as the crows overhead. "I saw you coming out of there," growled the man. "You're one of them. One of the bad ones." Marra shook her head. This was absurd. She'd broken bread with cursed souls, and of course it was supposedly sane man who was going to try to stop her. It was ridiculous. It was typical. The prince is sane too, as men judge these things. I should probably have seen it coming. "I'm not from there," she said, fighting the urge to defend the people inside. "I got lost. I'm from the Harbor Kingdom." The Harbor Kingdom is nowhere near here. Despite herself, Marra felt a pang of relief. Good. The blistered land did not touch her own kingdom. Not yet. Her relief was short-lived. The man was carrying a shovel. Marra eyed it warily. Shovels were good for burying dead bodies and also for making bodies dead in the first place. "I traveled for a long time," said Marra. "To get here, well, not here specifically, to the Dustwife." She wondered if the Dustwife's name would help. Surely everyone expected Dustwives. The man spat on the ground. "Trying to raise the dead?" he asked. "The bad dead in there?" He took a step forward. "No, Marra retreated, darting a glance over her shoulder. Could she make it to the safety of the fall? This is completely ridiculous. Did the hero Mordecai have to stop and explain about the poison worm to the locals? Did they try to chase him back into the swamps? Bad enough that Marra had failed in the task, but now this? He took another step forward and lifted his shovel. "You go back in," he said. "You go back in or I'll kill you. You stay where you belong." But she tried to explain. She really did. The words spilled out her like blood from a wound, a jumble of explanation about the Dustwife and the Bone Dog and 3 impossible tasks and traveling on the coaches from the Harbor Kingdom. And after about 30 seconds, she realized that he wasn't listening to her at all. He was staring past her into the fog. Marra turned and saw shadows moving into the murky edge of the blistered land. "Oh God," the man whispered, clutching his shovel. "Something's coming." Marra froze, tapped between the shadow and the shovel. Not daring to move, she could hear footsteps pounding on the earth, a rattling sound, and then it galloped out of the fog, an articulated ghost. Bouncing on its 4 legs, briefly it rose up and swiped at her face with its non-existent tongue and then dropped back down again. "Dog," she said. Tears began to spill down her face. "Dog, you came back." The bone dog gazed up at her from empty sockets, mouth open in a fleshless grin. "Monster," shouted the farmer, scrambling backward. "Monster!" "Monster where?" Marra looked behind her, wondering if something terrible came out of the blistered land. The skeleton dog barked soundlessly, bouncing on his paws, and Marra heard the lat bone click of vertebra and wire. She grabbed the dog by the backbone, trying to find a convenient way to hold him. She couldn't very well scruff an animal with no scruff. "Hush," she begged him. "Settle down, be quiet." The edge of the blistered land was calm. A crow cawed, and it echoed in a space neither here nor there. The man was long gone and had left his shovel behind. Monster? And then she looked down and realized that her assailant had been talking about that skeleton of the dog. "Oh, right, I suppose yes. She scowled. He was a good dog. He had excellent bones, and even if she had used too much wire and gotten it a bit muddled around the toes, one of the bones of the tail, she'd think that a decent person would stop and admire the craftsmanship before they screamed and ran away. No accounting for taste, she muttered. She was still crying a little, but her tears felt as ghostly as the bone dog's tongue. All right, let's go back to the dust wife and show her you exist. Because she was a novice, but would never take orders as a nun. Marra was not expected to attend services 3 times a day. Sometimes she did anyway. The services for Our Lady of the Crackles were short. The goddess or saint, no one was quite sure. Did not care for complex theology. No one knew what she wanted, only that she was generally kindly disposed to humans. We're a mystery religion, said the abbess, when she'd had a bit more wine than usual, for people who have too much work to do to bother with mysteries. So we simply get on as best as we can. Occasionally someone has a vision, but she doesn't seem to want anything much, so we try to return the favor. The statue of Our Lady of Crackles was a woman with a hood that fell in folds over her face to the lips. She had a small wry smile and 4 birds perched on her arm. Her altar clothes were embroidered and depictions of lesser saints. Since the goddess did not seem to want anything, the nuns offered prayers and saints that had no worshippers of their own. Some of them probably aren't alive, said the abbess, lighting the candles. But a few prayers for the dead won't go amiss either. The convent shared a wall with the monastery, and if she had a chaperone, Marra could go to their library. She had never been terribly easy with reading, but there were books on everything, not merely religion, and she found books on weaving and knitting. It was worth puzzling on the longest words to learn new patterns. She pieced bits together on scraps, and sometimes things worked and sometimes they didn't. But the burn of curiosity to see if the next thing would work, and the next thing, and the next, kept her forging ahead. She could not remember ever feeling such a thing before. There was no call to nurture intellectual curiosity among the princesses. She did not even quite know what to call it. It felt like a light shining in her chest, and she could see, just a little way ahead, that she was enough to keep her going forward. There was no one to tell her what she wanted to know, or whether the information even existed. She had no one to share her excitement with, but she did not mind, because it did not occur to her that anyone else might care. Because she was royal, and not quite a nun, Marra was allowed to keep going forward. When once a season the abbess wrote to the royal house and requested the payment to keep a princess, she mentioned that her charge was very fond of knitting and embroidery, and so fine wool and dyed thread found its way to convent alongside the coin. Her mother, the queen, sent careful, precise letters once a month. There was nothing in them that a spy could have found interesting. The king had a cold. The apple trees in the courtyards were flowering. The queen missed her. Marra did not know whether or not she believed this bit. In one line, the same every month, your sister says that she is well. When she was 18, Marra fell passionately in love with a young acolyte from the monastery who was apprentice to the brother Cellar. She had beautiful eyes and skilled hands, and she was utterly lost. They had 4 or 5 frantic, awkward couplings, and then Marra overheard him boasting to the other acolytes that he had bedded one of the king byblos. It did not matter that they jeered at him and didn't believe him. She went to her room and curled into a ball of misery and decided that she would die of a broken heart. Minstrels would write sad songs about how she had turned her face to the wall and died of the false-heartedness of men. She could not quite make up her mind whether she wanted to be a ghost who would haunt the convent or not. It would not be very satisfying to be a sad-eyed, beautiful ghost who drifted through the halls, gazing up at the moon, weeping silently as a warning to the other women. On the other hand, she was still short and round-faced and sturdy. and there were very few ghost stories about short, sturdy men. Marra had not managed to be pale and willowy and consumptive at any point in 18 years of life, and did not think she could achieve it before she died. Possibly it would be better to just have songs made about her. The sister apothecary came to her, the nun who doctored all the residents of the convent of various ailments, who compounded medicines and salves and treatments for the farmers' wives who lived nearby. She studied Marra intensely for a few minutes. "Is it a man?" "It's a man, is it?" she said finally. Marra grunted. It had occurred to her about an hour earlier that she did not know how the minstrels would find out that she existed in order to write the sad songs in the first place, and her mind was somehow occupied with this problem. Did she write them letters? The sister apothecary poured out 2 small measures of cordial and handed Marra one. "Drink with me," she said, "and I'll tell you about the first boy I ever loved." It took 3 more measures of cordial and 2 more tales of woe, but Marra uncurled and told the sister apothecary everything. The sister gave her a tea to bring her causes-on, just in case, and went to the abbess, and the young man was reassigned to another monastery a week later. Marra was left feeling raw and hollow, and brooding over the fact that somehow unknown noble woman had translated into king's bastard daughter in the minds of the monks. Well, it was safer than being a princess. She was outside the hierarchy, so she had been assigned a story that made sense of her possession. And Marra felt embarrassed for her mother because now everyone thought that the king had been unfaithful. And then suddenly it occurred to her that maybe he had been unfaithful and she did have half-sisters out of the ward. And it was too large and staggering a thought, so she buried it immediately. Her heart healed, as hearts almost do. She brooded for a little time and then she stopped brooding. She had the powerful and thoroughly unrequited love for a visiting scholar with fairy red hair and soulful eyes, which left her in pleasant agonies. Rather than ghosts or minstrels, this time she fantasized about growing old in the convent and telling young novices about the great lost love of her life. And time went on. Even that great passion became a fond memory, and the letters from the queen arrived month after month to tell her that her sister Kanya was well. When she was 20 and had spent 5 years in the little room with whitewashed walls and baskets of yarn and thread, she was summoned to the northern kingdom. Her sister Kanya was about to bear a child at last. It was strange to travel in the queen's carriage again. Marra was not confined to the convent and travelled over often enough to the nearby village, but she walked or rode on the donkey cart with one of the sisters. To be in a well-sprung carriage with velvet seats drawn by swift grey horses was a forgotten luxury. She stared out the window and thought how odd it was. How very odd. "You look well," said the queen. "Thank you," said Marra. She ran an appraising eye over her mother. It was like looking in a mirror, 20-odd years into the future. The queen's hair was still black, though henna played a part, and her clothing was as colorfully layered as armor, creating a shape with which enemy eyes could find no fault. "Mostly corsets," said the queen, amused, watching Marra's gaze. "There's a trick to it at my age. You must have a good figure for having borne 2 children, but not so girlish that people suspect artifice, and not so ripe that people think you're trying to be seductive." "It matters that much?" asked Marra, looking down at her own plain robes. The material was fine, and there were grackles embroidered around the sleeve, but no one would mistake her as being from anywhere but a convent. For a queen? Yes. Marra sighed. It seemed absurd. The abbess was stout as a barrel, and the sister apothecary had narrow shoulders and wide hips like a pear, and both of them wore layered robes like Marra. Except the abbess also had vestments and the sister apothecary tied the sleeves back to keep from trailing them in the hooves. "Clothing can be arranged for you," said the queen, "if you would like dresses instead of robes for the week." Her voice was carefully neutral, as if she did not wish to prejudice Marra's decision. Marra looked at the queen's clothing and remembered how long it had taken her in the mornings to get ready, even at at the age of 15. At the time, it had seemed exciting. Now it seemed so much work, and the eyes on her would be far less indulgent than the ones she had been, a teenage princess in her own family's castle. I have forgotten whatever I knew. There would be maids and ladies in waiting to tend me and do my hair and powder my face, but I would have to sit for hours while they dressed me like a doll, and then for the rest of the day I would be afraid to eat or drink for fear of ruining all their handiwork. I would rather appear as none, she said. Her mother nodded. More robes then, she said. It is easily done, but you will be treated as nun, not as princess. You know? I think, said Marra, folding her hands to hide the calluses from shoveling manure. I think I would prefer that. The Northern Kingdom's capital was set on a hill above a cold plain. There were few trees, and the mountains as a background loomed like swords, but the city loomed higher, as if it had been made to stand against the mountains. The first city had been walled, and had outgrown the walls, so a second to set had been built, then a third, until there were 5 sets of high white walls, and a main road spiraling up the hill between them to the palace. The white stone glowed against the brown earth. It was a chilly glow, like moonlight or snow. Marra felt very small compared to the immense white city, very small and insignificant, and yet she had the feeling that the effect was deliberate, as if the city was designed to make visitors feel insignificant in comparison. Perhaps it made it safe against invasion, she thought, but it does not seem like a friendly place. The carriage passed through the gates, under portcullises etched like saws. Marra pulled the lap quilt more tightly around herself, as if the cold was seeping in, then came along winding up to the palace through the streets that wrapped in circles over and over, and if they were climbing the body of a coiled eel. There were eels in the river near the convent, and sometimes people tipped them to the nuns. Marra had eaten a great many eels. She suspected that this one would stick in her throat if she tried. At the palace, hardly anyone waited to meet them. Marra had a vague notion that there should have been great snow of pomp and royal favor, and she had been braced to withstand it. When it failed to materialize, she felt off balance. Not many people, she murmured. We are being put in our place, said the queen calmly. We are here as Kanya's family, not as royal in voice, and so we are being reminded that we are poor relations. What do? We ignore it. She proceeded to alight from the carriage as if she were the queen of this kingdom, not a poor relation at all. The footman in livery flanked a woman who reminded Marra of the sister apothecary. She has gone into labor, said the midwife bluntly. Your Majesty, it'll be hours yet, but it's been hours already, and the first time's always hard. Take me to her. The place was a blaze of colour and hallways and tapestries. Marra was swept along in her mother's wake, following the midwife. She had also expected to go to a room and perhaps be able to rest or eat, but it seemed there was no time. Am I going to be there? Am I actually going to see it? Well, perhaps she was. The midwife opened a door, and there it was. A bedroom the size of a great hall with a fireplace at one end. Whatever the failings of their reception, the Northern Kingdom did not stint the midwives for their princes. It looked like half an army had encamped in the room, and in the middle of it, in a bed-like battlefield, was the dim brown circle of Kanya's face. You look radiant, said the queen, taking her daughter's hands. Marra looked behind her shoulder, unsure what to say. Kanya did not look radiant. She looked exhausted and wan, and her eyes were dark welts in her face. Mother, she said, clutching the queen's hands. Mother. She closed her eyes and swallowed. It sounded like a click in her throat. It will be over soon, promised the queen. It hurts, but then it's over. I don't care how much it hurts, said Kanya hoarsely. I want this child out of me now. That's every woman when the time comes, said the queen. She stooped and kissed Kanya's forehead. Soon enough, I promise. She rose. I'll get you something to eat or drink. she said, and turned to demand tea of the ladies in waiting. Marra looked after her mother nervously, then back to Kanya. She had not seen any woman deliver before, and she did not know what to expect, but the knowledge of Kanya's hatred was tucked up under her heart. Would her sister even want to see her here? Marra, whispered Kanya. I'm here, she said, taking her sister's hand. I'm here. You're here? Kanya repeated. She looked past Marra's shoulder. Where's mother? She went to get a drink for you, said Marra. She'll be back soon. No time then, said Kanya softly. She beckoned Marra closer until her lips was nearly beside Marra's ear. Kanya? Listen, hissed Kanya. Listen. If I die, don't let her remarry you after the prince. Run away, ruin yourself, whatever it takes. Don't let her drag you into this hell along with us. Marra blinked. Kanya, clutched at her shoulder, might have said something more, but a contraction ripped through her and she shrieked. Her swollen body bucked onto the bed. What is that? What was that? Marra looked around, panicking, because such a thing could not be normal, but the midwives were calm, acted as if it were every day that a woman's body writhed like a dying snake on the bed. The queen returned. Kanya gave Marra a last searching look before dropping her hand. The queen tipped water into her daughter's mouth and made soothing noises, and the midwives circled like jackals waiting for the babe to come.